The scissors made a sound no one expected to hear in a prison cafeteria. Snip. Every inmate froze. Every guard looked up, and the black girl sitting alone at the table didn't move. She didn't scream. She didn't stand. She didn't even touch the long braid now lying on the dirty floor. The bully, Marla Briggs, the self-appointed queen of the block, grinned as she twirled the scissors. "Thought you were pretty, huh?" she said. "New girl needs a makeover." Laughter exploded around them. But the new girl, her breathing stayed calm, too calm. Her shoulders stayed still. Her jaw tightened only once, just enough for anyone paying attention to realize something was terribly, terribly wrong. Marla leaned in, lifting another section of her hair. "Say something," she taunted. "Cry. Beg. Do something." The new girl finally looked up, and the room went silent. Because those weren't the eyes of someone humiliated. They were the eyes of someone calculating, someone trained, someone who'd been waiting very patiently for someone stupid enough to touch her first. Marla's smile faded. Her hands started to tremble. The inmates around them began to step back, one by one, as if their bodies understood a truth their brains hadn't caught up to yet. They had just cut the hair of a woman who used to end fights before they even began. And in the next 45 seconds, they would learn exactly what kind of fighter she was. Stay with me until the end, because what she does next in that cafeteria will make every inmate and every guard wish they never saw her angry. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now let's get started. Kesha Williams had been in Riverside Correctional for exactly 17 days. 17 days of watching, listening, learning the rhythm of a place where power shifted faster than the wind. She'd seen enough prisons to know the game. Every block had its queen. Every yard had its rules. Every cafeteria had its invisible lines you didn't cross unless you wanted trouble. But what none of them knew was that Kesha Williams wasn't just any inmate. She was a woman who'd learned to fight before she'd learned to read. A woman who'd survived streets where weakness meant death. A woman who'd spent the last 8 years of her life teaching other women how to defend themselves in places where the law couldn't reach. The other inmates saw what they wanted to see. A quiet girl who kept to herself. Someone who read books during rec time instead of starting drama. Someone who ate alone, walked alone, and minded her own business. What they didn't see was the way she positioned herself at every table to have a clear view of exits. The way her eyes tracked every movement in her peripheral vision. The way her hands stayed loose but ready. Always ready. Marla Briggs had been watching her since day one. Marla ran the West Wing through fear and violence. She was 6 feet tall, built like a linebacker, with arms covered in tattoos that told the story of every fight she'd won. She'd been locked up for aggravated assault, and she'd built her reputation by making sure every new girl understood exactly who was in charge. But Kesha had refused to play the game. She hadn't approached Marla with respect or tribute. She hadn't asked permission to sit in the common area or use the phone. She'd simply existed, unbothered by the hierarchy that kept everyone else in line. And that was a problem Marla couldn't ignore. The first test came during Kesha's second week. Marla's crew cornered her in the laundry room, blocking her path to the door. They didn't touch her, didn't threaten her directly. They just made it clear that new girls paid a tax if they wanted protection. Kesha had looked at each of them calmly, then walked straight through their formation like they were nothing more than shadows. She didn't push. She didn't shove. She simply moved with such quiet confidence that they stepped aside without thinking. That should have been the end of it. But Marla's pride was wounded, and wounded pride in prison was dangerous. The second test came in the shower. Someone had stolen Kesha's soap, her shampoo, her towel. Standard intimidation tactics. Make the new girl feel helpless, dependent, small. Kesha had washed with cold water and dried herself with her shirt. She never complained, never reported it, never showed even a flicker of frustration, which only made Marla angrier. By the third week, it was clear that Kesha Williams was different. She didn't break under pressure. She didn't bend to authority. She didn't even seem to notice the games everyone else was forced to play. And that's when Marla decided to make it personal. She'd been studying Kesha's routine, looking for the perfect moment to establish dominance once and for all. She noticed how carefully Kesha maintained her appearance, how she braided her hair every morning with precision, how she kept herself clean and dignified despite everything around her. Hair was power in prison. It was identity, pride, the one thing that belonged to you when everything else had been taken away. Cut someone's hair without permission, and you cut their spirit. At least, that's how it worked with everyone else. The morning it happened, Kesha had been sitting in her usual spot. Corner table, back to the wall, clear view of the entire cafeteria. She was eating slowly, methodically, her eyes scanning the room like she was reading a book. Marla approached from behind, scissors hidden in her palm. She'd taken them from the craft room during free time, slipped them past the guards who'd grown lazy after months of routine. Her crew formed a loose circle around the table, creating a barrier between Kesha and any help that might come. The first snip was meant to be shocking, humiliating, a statement that would echo through every cell block and establish Marla's authority beyond question. But as Kesha's braid fell to the floor, something shifted in the air. The laughter that had erupted from Marla's crew began to fade. The other inmates who'd been watching with amusement started backing away, because Kesha Williams wasn't reacting like a victim. She was reacting like a predator who'd just been given permission to hunt. Her breathing remained steady, controlled, rhythmic. Her posture didn't change. Her hands stayed flat on the table, but her fingers had spread slightly, finding their grip. And when she finally turned to look at Marla, everyone in that cafeteria understood they were about to witness something they'd never forget. The transformation was subtle but terrifying. Kesha's eyes went from calm to cold, from peaceful to predatory. Her mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile, but promised violence. "You finished?" she asked quietly. Her voice carried across the suddenly silent room like a blade through silk. Even the guards had stopped their conversations, sensing something electric in the air. Marla tried to hold on to her confidence, raising the scissors again. "I'm just getting started, Princess. Maybe I'll clean up the other side too." That's when Kesha stood up. Not fast, not dramatically, just a smooth, fluid motion that somehow managed to command every eye in the room. She was smaller than Marla, lighter, seemingly less threatening. But the way she moved suggested otherwise. Every step was calculated. Every gesture was economical. She carried herself like someone who'd never lost a fight, because she'd never entered one she couldn't win. "Put the scissors down," she said. It wasn't a request. It wasn't a threat. It was a fact delivered with the certainty of gravity. Marla's hand began to shake, but pride and reputation wouldn't let her back down. Not in front of everyone. Not when her entire world depended on being feared. "Make me," she snarled, lunging forward with the scissors aimed at Kesha's face. What happened next would be talked about in whispers for years to come. Kesha moved like water finding its level. One moment Marla was lunging forward with deadly intent. The next, she was on the ground wondering how she'd gotten there. The scissors clattered across the floor, spinning away from fingers that no longer had the strength to hold them. It hadn't been dramatic. No wild swinging, no screaming, no chaos. Just 3 precise movements executed with surgical precision. A deflection that redirected Marla's momentum, a sweep that took her legs, and a controlled takedown that left the bigger woman flat on her back, gasping. The entire sequence lasted maybe 2 seconds, but those 2 seconds rewrote every assumption about power in that cafeteria. Kesha stood over Marla, completely composed, not even breathing hard. She reached down and picked up her severed braid, examining it like it was a piece of evidence. "This belonged to me," she said quietly. Her voice carried to every corner of the room, though she wasn't shouting. "Everything that belongs to me stays with me unless I decide otherwise." Marla tried to scramble backward, her tough facade crumbling like wet paper. For 3 years, she'd ruled through intimidation. through the threat of violence that everyone assumed she could deliver. Now she was discovering the difference between someone who talked about fighting and someone who simply fought. But Kesha wasn't done with her lesson. She knelt beside Marla, close enough that only she could hear. "I know what you're thinking," she whispered. "You're thinking this was lucky. You're thinking maybe I caught you off guard. You're thinking about how you're going to get me back." Marla's eyes went wide, because that was exactly what she'd been thinking. "Let me save you some time," Kesha continued. "I fought professionally for 6 years before I came here. Muay Thai, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, boxing. I've been in rings with women who could break you in half without working up a sweat. I've taught self-defense to women whose lives depended on learning fast and learning right." She held up the braid, letting Marla see the clean cut where the scissors had sliced through. "This hair took me 2 years to grow. It meant something to me. And you cut it off because you thought I was weak. You thought I was prey." The cafeteria had gone dead silent. Even the guards seemed frozen, uncertain how to process what they were witnessing. "But here's what you didn't understand," Kesha said, her voice dropping even lower. "I let you cut it. I let you think you had power over me, because I needed to know exactly who you were before I decided what to do about you." She stood up slowly, the braid still in her hand. "Now I know. What happened next would become legend in Riverside Correctional, not because of its violence, but because of its complete lack thereof." Kesha walked to the center of the cafeteria, every eye following her movement. She set her braid down on the nearest table, then turned to address the room. "My name is Kesha Williams," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it commanded attention in a way that shouting never could. "I've been here 17 days. In that time, I've watched how things work. Who runs what? Who's afraid of who? Who thinks they're untouchable?" She looked around the room, making eye contact with inmates who'd been running their own smaller operations, their own schemes and intimidation tactics. "I didn't come here to take over. I didn't come here to start trouble. I came here to do my time and get out. But I also didn't come here to be anyone's victim." A few of the women exchanged glances. They were starting to understand that the quiet new girl had been studying them just as much as they'd been studying her. "So here's how this works now," Kesha continued. "Anyone who wants to test me is welcome to try. But understand that I don't fight to make a point. I don't fight to send a message. Fight to end problems permanently." She walked over to where Marla was still on the ground, extending her hand. "Get up." Marla hesitated, clearly expecting some kind of trap. But Kesha's hand remained steady, offering help without malice. Slowly, cautiously, Marla accepted the assistance and got to her feet. "You cut my hair," Kesha said matter-of-factly. "In the world I come from, that would mean we have a problem that needs solving. But we're not in that world. We're in this one. So I'm going to give you a choice." The entire room leaned in, straining to hear what came next. "Option 1. We settle this the way you understand. Right here, right now, in front of everyone. I guarantee you won't like how that ends." Marla's face had gone pale. She was beginning to realize that her reputation, built on the fear of consequences, meant nothing to someone who calculated consequences as part of their strategy. "Option 2. You apologize. Publicly. You acknowledge that what you did was wrong, and then you help me explain to everyone here why it's never going to happen again." The choice hung in the air like smoke. Everyone knew that in prison, backing down was often worse than losing a fight. Reputation was everything. Respect was currency. Show weakness and the wolves would circle. But Marla was looking into Kesha's eyes and seeing something that changed the equation entirely. This wasn't about respect or reputation or prison politics. This was about survival. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Louder," Kesha said. Not meanly, but firmly, like a teacher correcting a student. "I'm sorry," Marla repeated, her voice carrying across the cafeteria. "I shouldn't have cut your hair. It was wrong." Kesha nodded. "And why won't it happen again?" Marla looked around the room, seeing the faces of women who'd feared her for years, now watching her subordinate herself to someone half her size. Because, she said slowly, the words clearly difficult. Because you're not someone who can be disrespected. No, Kesha corrected gently. Because no one here should be disrespected. Because everyone deserves basic human dignity, whether they can defend themselves or not. She picked up her braid again, holding it like it was something precious. I can fight, she said to the room. Obviously, but that's not why I'm here. I'm here because sometimes fighting is the only language certain people understand. And sometimes you have to speak that language to protect people who can't speak it themselves. The guards finally started moving, clearly unsure whether to intervene or not. No actual violence had occurred. No rules had technically been broken. But the entire power structure of the prison had just shifted in ways they weren't equipped to handle. Kesha walked back to her table, sat down, and resumed eating her lunch as if nothing had happened. But everyone in that cafeteria knew that everything had changed. The word spread through Riverside Correctional like wildfire through dry grass. By dinner time, every inmate on every block had heard some version of what happened in the cafeteria. The stories grew with each telling, but the core remained the same. Marla Briggs, the woman who'd ruled the West Wing through fear and brutality, had been humbled by someone who looked like she belonged in a library. Not a fight. But what none of them understood yet was that the real lesson hadn't even begun. Kesha spent the rest of that day exactly as she'd spent every other day since arriving. She read during rec time, sitting in the same corner of the common area, her back to the wall, eyes occasionally lifting from the pages to scan her surroundings. She worked out alone in the small exercise area, moving through routines that looked more like dance than training. She ate dinner at her usual table, methodically, calmly, as if the entire social structure of the prison hadn't shifted beneath her feet. The other inmates watched her differently now, some with newfound respect, others with calculation, wondering how they could use this new development to their advantage. A few kept their distance entirely, recognizing something dangerous in the way she moved through space with such casual confidence. But it was the guards who presented the real problem. Officer Martinez had been working Riverside for 8 years. He'd seen riots, stabbings, full-scale brawls that left the medical ward overflowing. He prided himself on maintaining order through a careful balance of respect and intimidation. The inmates feared him just enough to behave, but trusted him just enough to cooperate when it mattered. Kesha Williams threatened that balance. He'd watched the cafeteria incident unfold from across the room, too far away to intervene before it ended. On paper, nothing had happened. No violence, no injuries, no violations he could write up. But the atmosphere had changed in ways that made his job infinitely more complicated. Marla Briggs had been predictable. Brutal, yes, but predictable. She kept the other inmates in line through fear, which meant Martinez didn't have to. It was an ugly arrangement, but it worked. Now that arrangement was broken, and he wasn't sure what would replace it. That evening, as Kesha walked back to her cell after dinner, Martinez intercepted her in the corridor. His hand rested casually on his baton, not threatening, but present. Williams, he said, we need to talk. Kesha stopped, turned to face him with the same calm attention she gave everything else. Yes, sir? What happened in the cafeteria today? That can't happen again. She tilted her head slightly. What exactly can't happen again, Officer Martinez? He paused, realizing the trap in the question. How could he tell her not to defend herself? How could he write up someone who'd done nothing technically wrong? How could he maintain order by protecting the very behavior that had disrupted it in the first place? You know what I mean, he said finally. I'm not sure I do. Her voice remained respectful, but there was steel underneath. Someone attacked me with a weapon. I defended myself without seriously injuring them. I thought that was exactly what we're supposed to do. Martinez felt his frustration building. She was right, technically. But technically right didn't help him manage 300 inmates who were all recalculating their place in the hierarchy. Look, he said, dropping his voice. I know you can handle yourself. That's obvious. But when you handle yourself, Other people get ideas. They start thinking maybe they can handle themselves too. Before you know it, I've got chaos on my hands. Kesha studied his face for a long moment. So you're asking me to let people attack me? To make your job easier? I'm asking you to be smart about how you handle situations. There are ways to solve problems without making them bigger. Like what? Martinez realized he didn't have a good answer. In his experience, problems in prison got solved through violence or the threat of violence. Authority came from the ability to inflict consequences. But Kesha had demonstrated both without actually breaking any rules, and that made her impossible to contain using his usual methods. Just think before you act, he said finally. That's all I'm asking. Kesha nodded slowly. I always think before I act, Officer Martinez. The question is whether other people think before they act on me. She continued walking toward her cell, leaving him standing in the corridor with the uncomfortable realization that he might not be dealing with an inmate problem. He might be dealing with an inmate solution he didn't know how to manage. Word of the conversation spread just as quickly as word of the cafeteria incident had. By lights out, every woman on the block knew that even the guards were unsure how to handle Kesha Williams. Some saw this as an opportunity. Cell Block D had its own ecosystem of power and survival. While Marla controlled the West Wing through intimidation, the East Wing operated under different rules. Here, influence flowed through information, contraband, and strategic alliances. The woman who ran this section was named Carmen Rodriguez, and she'd been watching Kesha with professional interest since day one. Carmen didn't rule through fear. She ruled through intelligence, through knowing exactly what everyone needed and positioning herself as the person who could provide it. She had connections on the outside, relationships with guards, and a network of information that made her indispensable to both inmates and staff. But she also had a problem that Kesha Williams might be able to solve. 2 days after the cafeteria incident, Carmen approached Kesha during breakfast. She didn't come with an entourage or fanfare. She simply sat down across from her, as if they were old friends meeting for coffee. Mind if I join you?" she asked, though she was already settling into the chair. Kesha looked up from her book, evaluated the situation, then nodded once. "Free country," Carmen laughed. "Not exactly, but I appreciate the sentiment." They sat in silence for a moment. Carmen studying Kesha with the same intensity Kesha had studied the prison's power structure. Two intelligent women taking each other's measure. "You've caused quite a stir," Carmen said finally. "I've minded my own business," Kesha replied. "Same thing, in here. Minding your own business is revolutionary when everyone else's business involves controlling yours." Kesha closed her book, giving Carmen her full attention. "What do you want?" Carmen smiled. Direct. She liked that. "I want to offer you something. I'm listening. Protection, resources, a place in the structure that doesn't require you to fight every day just to exist." Kesha leaned back slightly. "In exchange for?" "Your skills, your reputation, the fact that people are now afraid of quiet women who read books and eat alone. I'm not interested in running anyone's operation. I'm not asking you to run anything. I'm asking you to be visible, to let people know that crossing certain lines means dealing with someone who can't be intimidated or bought or broken." Kesha was quiet for a long moment, considering. "What lines?" Carmen leaned forward, lowering her voice. "There's a group on Block C. They've been targeting the younger girls. Sexual assault, extortion, forcing them into situations they can't get out of. The guards look the other way because it keeps the rest of the population calm. Better to sacrifice a few than deal with widespread unrest." The temperature around their table seemed to drop several degrees. When Kesha spoke, her voice carried an edge that made Carmen remember why everyone was suddenly afraid of her. "How many girls?" "At least 6 that I know of. Probably more who haven't come forward." "How long has this been going on?" "Months, maybe longer. It's organized, systematic. They pick girls who don't have protection, who won't be missed if they disappear into the system." Kesha's hands had gone very still on the table. "And you want me to what, exactly?" "Send a message. Make it clear that those girls are under protection now, that anyone who touches them has to go through you first. Why haven't you handled this yourself? Carmen's expression darkened. Because I'm a politician, not a warrior. I survive through relationships and information. They respect my territory because I'm useful to them, but they don't fear me, and some problems require fear. Kesha picked up her book again, not to read, but to think. What makes you think I care about girls I don't know? Because of why you're here. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Carmen had done her homework, clearly. She knew Kesha's history, her charges, the circumstances that had led to her incarceration. Enlighten me, Kesha said quietly. You're here because you put 3 men in the hospital for attacking a 14-year-old girl outside a subway station. You didn't know her, didn't owe her anything, but you saw someone being hurt and you stopped it. Permanently. Kesha's grip on her book tightened almost imperceptibly. That was different. How? Those were grown men attacking a child on the street. This is prison. The rules are different here. Are they? Carmen asked. Or is that just what we tell ourselves to make it easier to look away? The question hit deeper than Carmen probably realized. Kesha had spent her 17 days at Riverside, observing, cataloging, understanding the system. She'd seen the predators and their prey, the complex web of protection and exploitation that kept the population stable. She'd told herself it wasn't her problem, that she was here to serve her time and leave. But she'd also noticed the way certain girls walked with their eyes down, the way they flinched when approached, the way they seemed to shrink into themselves during meals and rec time. She'd noticed, and she'd chosen to look away. I'll think about it, she said finally. Carmen nodded, understanding that this was as close to a yes as she was likely to get. The leader of their group is named Tank Morrison. She runs Block C like her personal hunting ground. If you decide to send that message, she's the one who needs to receive it. She stood to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, those girls have been watching you since the cafeteria. They see someone who can't be broken, and for the first time in months, they have hope. Don't let them down. Carmen walked away, leaving Kesha alone with her thoughts and a choice that would define not just her remaining time at Riverside, but the kind of person she chose to be when no one was watching. That night, lying on her narrow bunk in the darkness, Kesha stared at the ceiling and thought about the girl outside the subway station. Thought about the moment when she'd had to choose between walking away and getting involved. Thought about how that choice had led her here, to another moment where someone needed protection and she was the only one capable of providing it. The difference was that this time, the consequences would follow her for the rest of her sentence. This time, there would be no walking away when it was over. But as she listened to the sounds of the prison at night, the muffled crying from cells she couldn't see, the whispered conversations about things she didn't want to imagine, she realized the choice had already been made. Some lines couldn't be crossed without consequences, and sometimes being the consequence was the only way to stop the crossing. Tomorrow, she would meet Tank Morrison, and Riverside Correctional would learn that quiet women who minded their own business could be the most dangerous of all. The morning came too soon for what Kesha had planned. She woke before the buzzer, her internal clock calibrated to precision after years of training that started before dawn. In the gray light filtering through the narrow window, she could hear the prison beginning to stir. Guards changing shifts, inmates shuffling toward the communal bathrooms, the mechanical sounds of a place where freedom was measured in minutes between locked doors. But today felt different. Today carried the weight of a decision that would ripple through every cell block, every corridor, every whispered conversation in the shadows. Kesha sat on the edge of her bunk, hands resting on her knees, breathing steady and controlled. She'd spent the night thinking about Tank Morrison, about the girls who walked with their heads down, about the choice between survival and justice. By 3 a.m, the decision had crystallized with the clarity of ice. Some fights chose you whether you wanted them or not. She moved through her morning routine with deliberate calm, washed her face with cold water, brushed her teeth methodically, looked at herself in the small metal mirror, noting how the uneven cut of her hair had already started to grow back. Hair was just hair, she reminded herself, but dignity was everything. The breakfast bell rang at 6 sharp, and Kesha joined the stream of women moving toward the cafeteria. She could feel eyes on her, conversations dying as she passed. Word had spread about her conversation with Carmen Rodriguez. In prison, secrets lasted about as long as ice cream in summer heat. She took her usual tray, filled it with the same bland food she'd been eating for 18 days now, and walked to her corner table. But this time, she didn't sit with her back to the wall. She chose a chair that gave her a clear view of the entrance, where she could watch everyone who came and went. Tank Morrison arrived exactly 7 minutes after the breakfast bell stopped ringing. She was impossible to miss. 6'2", built like a construction worker, with shoulders that could carry a refrigerator and hands that looked like they'd done it before. Her hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail, and her eyes swept the room like a predator marking territory. Behind her walked 4 other women, each one carefully chosen for their ability to intimidate through size or reputation, or the kind of cold stare that promised violence. They moved as a unit, claiming space without having to ask for it, their presence shifting the energy of the room like storm clouds blocking out sunlight. Kesha watched them settle at a table near the center of the cafeteria, positioning themselves where they could see everything, control everything. She noticed how other inmates adjusted their seating, creating invisible buffer zones. She noticed how conversations grew quieter. She noticed how several younger women suddenly found reasons to finish their breakfast early. Kesha finished her breakfast, stood up slowly, and walked directly toward Tank Morrison's table. The cafeteria went silent. Every conversation stopped. Every fork paused midway to waiting mouths. Even the guards sensed something electric building in the air. She stopped 3 feet from Tank's chair, close enough to be heard, but far enough to show respect for the space between predators. Tank looked up, annoyed at first, then curious, then calculating as she recognized the woman who'd humbled Marla Briggs without breaking a sweat. "You got something to say?" Tank asked, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to being feared. Kesha's response was quiet, measured, final. "Those girls you've been touching, that stops today. Right now. Forever." Tank's crew tensed, hands moving instinctively toward weapons that weren't there. But Tank herself smiled, the kind of cold expression that had made grown men step aside in the streets. "Or what?" she asked. Kesha's answer came without hesitation, without anger, without anything except absolute certainty. "Or you find out why Marla Briggs walks with her head down now." The room held its breath. 2 apex predators, measuring each other across 3 feet of space that might as well have been a battlefield. Tank was bigger, stronger, had more people backing her play, but something in Kesha's stillness, in the way she stood without tension or fear, made the math feel different than it should have. Tank stood up, using every inch of her height advantage, trying to intimidate through presence alone. "You think because you got lucky with Marla, you can walk up to me? In my house? Making demands?" "I'm not making demands," Kesha replied. "I'm stating facts. The girls under your thumb are under my protection now. Touch one of them again, and we'll finish this conversation in a way that leaves no room for misunderstanding." What happened next surprised everyone, including Tank herself. Instead of escalating to violence, she laughed, a genuine laugh that carried respect alongside the threat. "You got stones, I'll give you that. Walking up to me like this, most people wouldn't have the spine. Most people aren't me," Kesha said simply. Tank nodded slowly, recognizing something in Kesha that reminded her of herself before prison had twisted her into something darker. "All right, here's what's going to happen. Those girls you're so worried about, they're off limits. But that protection costs something in here. Nothing's free. What's the price? When I need someone handled, someone who thinks they can disrespect my operation, you handle them. Clean. Professional. No questions asked." Kesha considered this for a long moment. It wasn't the answer she'd hoped for, but it was the reality of prison politics. Sometimes you had to make deals with devils to protect angels. Deal, she said. But understand this. I don't work for you. I work with you. And if you ever cross the line we just drew, our arrangement ends the same way your harassment of those girls just ended. Tank extended her hand, and Kesha shook it. A pact sealed in the language both women understood. Mutual respect backed by the promise of mutual destruction if either one broke faith. As Kesha walked away, the cafeteria slowly returned to life. Conversations resumed. Guards relaxed. But everyone understood that the power structure of Riverside Correctional had shifted again, this time into something more complex, more balanced, more dangerous for anyone who preyed on the weak. That afternoon, a 17-year-old girl named Maria approached Kesha during rec time. She was small, scared, carrying herself like someone who'd learned to disappear to survive. "Is it true?" she whispered. "Are we really safe now?" Kesha looked at her, seeing herself at 17, seeing every woman who'd ever been told to accept violence as the price of existing in a world that didn't value their safety. "You were always supposed to be safe," she said quietly. "Now you actually are." And as word spread through the prison that night, through whispered conversations in cells and corridors, everyone understood that Kesha Williams hadn't just won a fight or made an alliance. She'd changed the rules of a place where rules were written in blood and enforced through fear. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one who refuses to accept that dangerous is all they're allowed to be. And sometimes it only takes one person willing to stand up to remind everyone else what courage looks like. The scissors that had started it all were never found, but the braid they'd severed had grown back, stronger than before, just like the woman who wore it.